Welcome to the Horror Stories YouTube channel. The village of Langford sat on the edge of the world, or so it seemed. The rolling hills around it were steeped in silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the tall grass or the distant creak of ancient trees. A thick fog often settled into the valley as night approached, thickening the air and making the cottages seem like shadowy monoliths, half-formed in the mist. Time, for the people of Langford, had a strange quality, sluggish, as though the village was caught between moments, too old to be truly modern but too young to be a relic. Among the narrow cobblestone streets and moss-covered homes lived the Emmer family, known for being reclusive, quiet, and according to the few neighbors who dared speak of them, strange. The Emmers had lived in Langford for as long as anyone could remember, but they rarely mingled with the others. They were always seen in twos or threes, moving quickly through the streets, their heads low, their eyes darting about like cornered animals. Thomas Emmer was the youngest of the family, a slight, pale figure who often walked alone, lost in thought. He had the same hollow-eyed, gaunt look as the rest of his kin, but there was something about him that felt more fragile. His hair was unkempt, his clothes always a bit too large, as though they were hand-me-downs from someone much older. His pale blue eyes, often downcast, seemed to flicker with a restless energy. On the rare occasions that Thomas was seen in town, people whispered about the strange air that clung to him. Children, when they dared approach, would ask him odd questions about the dark woods that surrounded the village, about the old well on the outskirts, about the things they sometimes saw moving in the fog at night. But Thomas would never answer. Instead, he would glance over his shoulder, as if something unseen was watching him, and hurry away. There were stories in Langford about the Emmers, stories that no one would say aloud when they were sure they weren't being listened to. It was said that the Emmers had been cursed long ago, that the land they lived on was tainted by an ancient evil. The older folk, with their shaking hands and eyes clouded by years, hard work and half-forgotten memories, would speak in hushed tones about a pact made long ago, a pact that had bound the Emmers to the land, and perhaps even to something far worse. No one could remember exactly when the pact had been made or who had sealed it, but everyone knew that the Emmers weren't quite human. There were whispered accounts of strange lights flickering in the windows of their home late at night, of pale figures moving in the woods during moonless nights, their eyes gleaming like animal predators. The worst rumors, however, concerned the Emmers' children, always pale, always silent, always moving like shadows, never seen during the day but appearing in the dead of night, wandering the hills with a strange, unsettling grace. The last time Thomas was seen outside the village was at the beginning of winter, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder. He had wandered into the woods, a dark shape in the distance, walking away from the village without turning back. By the time his family realized he was missing, it was already too late. Search parties scoured the hills, the forest, and the caves nearby, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no torn clothes, no trace of his presence at all. It was as though he had been swallowed whole by the land. Days passed, and the fog came earlier that year. The villagers gathered in the small, drafty pub at the center of the town, whispering about the Emmer family. They talked about how strange it was that they hadn't even mourned Thomas's disappearance. The Emmers, so tight-knit and peculiar, had simply gone about their business. No laments, no vigils. It was as though they had expected it. The eldest Emmer, a woman whose hair had turned as white as the fog, had muttered something under her breath when the villagers confronted her about Thomas. The trees take their due, she had said. The land is hungry. The villagers knew better than to press the issue further. They had learned long ago that some things in Langford were best left undisturbed. But as winter deepened and the fog rolled in thicker and earlier each night, more than one person in the village swore they had seen him, Thomas, walking the outskirts of the woods, his pale figure half hidden in the mist, his head hanging low as if weighed down by something too heavy to bear. Each sighting was fleeting. One moment, Thomas would be there, and the next, he would vanish, leaving only the sound of the wind to whisper through the trees. But the village was on edge. People began to talk less, their voices barely audible, as they passed one another on the streets, their heads lowered in fearful silence. The long hours of winter stretched on, and the sense of dread in Langford grew more palpable. It wasn't until spring that the first of the children disappeared. Young Elsie Harper, a bright and curious girl with pigtails and a laugh that could shake the dust from the walls, was the first to go missing. One moment she had been playing with her friends near the old well, the next she was gone. The children had heard her scream, but by the time they ran to find her, There was no trace of her, just a patch of disturbed earth where she had stood. The search parties, led by the local constable, scoured the village and the nearby woods for days. But they found nothing, no sign of struggle, no clue as to what had happened. It was as though Elsie had simply vanished into the earth, swallowed whole by the very land that had taken Thomas. The next night, the fog rolled in early, and again, someone saw him, Thomas, standing at the edge of the woods, staring toward the village with an expression of hollow emptiness on his face. The fog swallowed him again, and the village was left with the unsettling sense that the land was shifting, growing hungrier. As the weeks passed, more children went missing. The village was in a panic. Parents kept their children close, refusing to let them leave the house after dusk. But the fog thickened, and the nights grew darker. The constable, who had once been a man of firm resolve, now walked with his head bowed and his shoulders slumped. He no longer had the energy to organize search parties. The village, once full of life and laughter, was now gripped by fear, its streets deserted after sundown. And then, one evening, the village's silence was broken by a knock on the door of the pub. It was the eldest Emmer, her white hair trailing behind her like a shroud. She had come to speak. The villagers watched her through the grimy windows, too afraid to approach. Slowly, she entered the pub, her old, bony fingers curled around a cane. Her eyes, though clouded with age, seemed sharp as she scanned the room. She stepped to the center of the room, her voice quaking like dry leaves in the wind. "They've come," she said. "The old ones. The things beneath the earth." Her words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. "They were here long before any of us," she continued, her voice growing more raspy. "The Emmers. We have always been here to keep the land from devouring the village. We ... We are bound to the land, to the soil, to the hunger beneath." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Thomas." Her eyes flickered toward the voice. "Thomas is lost now. He is part of it, but the others ... The others are still here, waiting." The pub grew colder as she spoke, the light dimming as if the very room was being swallowed by the darkness she described. And then, before anyone could say another word, she turned and walked out of the pub, disappearing into the thickening fog. That was the last time anyone saw her. The following days were marked by a sudden, almost palpable shift in the air. The villagers, now desperate, began to leave Langford. One by one, their homes were abandoned. No one spoke of the Emmers anymore. The old tales, the whisperings about the pact, the hungry land, they all remained behind, left to fester in the silence of an empty village. But the fog remained, and somewhere in the depths of the woods, behind the veil of mist and shadows, the Emmers still waited, bound to a land that was always hungry, always waiting for the next soul to come wandering into its grasp. And so, the village of Langford, like so many others before it, was swallowed whole by the earth, the trees, and the mist, its name fading into the forgotten whispers of time.